Okay, first of all, I know the history behind the WNBA. I know that both of those cities have had teams before and they got us where we're at, so I'm thankful for that.
It was supposed to be a celebration of basketball's newest icon, a victory lap for a player changing the game before our very eyes. Instead, the court became a battleground, and Caitlin Clark was the primary target. Every team from the Dallas Wings to the Phoenix Mercury seemed to have the same game plan, and it had little to do with scoring points. The air in the arenas felt different when she was on the floor, thicker, heavier, charged with a strange mix of adoration from the stands and barely concealed animosity from her opponents. It was a physical, brutal welcome to the professional leagues, a baptism by fire that felt less like a test and more like a punishment. But one moment, one shocking collision ripped the veil off and exposed the raw, unspoken resentment simmering just beneath the surface of the league. It was a clash that revealed a truth far darker than anyone wanted to admit. A calculated act of aggression that left everyone asking one crucial question. Was this just basketball? Or was it a coordinated league-wide attack on the WNBA's new golden child? The arrival of Caitlin Clark into the WNBA wasn't just big. It was a seismic event that shook the foundations of women's sport. She was more than a #1 draft pick. She was a phenomenon, a walking, talking revolution in a pair of basketball sneakers. The Caitlin Clark effect was real and its impact was immediate and overwhelming. TV ratings shattered records that had stood for decades, with networks like ESPN and ABC suddenly giving the WNBA primetime slots that were once unthinkable. Arenas that once had empty seats were suddenly sold out, filled with a deafening chorus of fans screaming her name, many of whom had never watched a WNBA game before. She signed a staggering $28 million deal with Nike before she even played a single professional game, a figure that dwarfed the salaries of many of the league's most decorated veterans combined. The league itself was bending to her star power, with the controversial issue of charter flights suddenly becoming a top priority. A luxury previously unheard of for WNBA teams that had spent years flying commercial. Clark wasn't just playing basketball. She was a one-woman economic stimulus package for the entire league, and everyone knew it. But with all that blinding light came a creeping, insidious shadow. For the veterans who had fought for years in relative obscurity, who had clawed for every scrap of media attention and every dollar in their contracts, this sudden tidal wave of fame centered on one rookie felt like a profound slap in the face. They saw a player being hailed as the savior of the league before she had earned a single win, before she had felt the sting of a professional loss. The media narrative wasn't just about her incredible talent. It was about how she was single-handedly lifting the WNBA from the depths, erasing the contributions of the legends who came before her. This created a dangerous cocktail of professional jealousy, righteous indignation, and old-school pride. A storm was gathering and the veterans were ready to unleash it. They believed respect in the pros isn't given, it's taken, often by force. And as Clark continued to dominate headlines, that unspoken sentiment grew louder and more unified in locker rooms across the country, transforming from quiet whispers into a clear, unified message. She will not have an easy path. All that simmering tension needed was a spark to ignite it. A moment to make the subtext into text. That moment would come in the form of a brutal blindside collision that no one could ignore. And what happened next would change the conversation forever. The game was against the Phoenix Mercury, and the atmosphere was already electric, humming with a palpable tension. Every possession felt heavy. Every dribble charged with unspoken conflict. Then it happened. As Caitlin Clark moved without the ball, cutting across the lane, trying to get open, she was met by a human brick wall named Sophie Cunningham. It wasn't a normal screen. It wasn't a subtle pick set to free up a teammate. It was a deliberate, forceful blindside hit. A shoulder driven into an unsuspecting opponent with maximum impact. A move more suited for an NFL linebacker than a WNBA forward. Clark crumpled to the floor. The wind knocked out of her. The look on her face a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. The whistle blew. a shrill sound cutting through the stunned silence of the crowd. But the damage was done. This was more than just a hard foul. It was a message delivered with brutal efficiency in front of a national audience. The play was replayed endlessly from every conceivable angle, each one revealing the sheer premeditated force of the impact. You could see Cunningham plant her feet, brace herself, and then lower her shoulder in a way that seemed designed to inflict punishment, not to play basketball. It was a calculated act of aggression, a physical statement that screamed, "This is not college anymore. Your highlight reels mean nothing here." The league's golden child had just been publicly humbled, and the player who delivered the blow stood over the scene with an air of cold, detached professionalism, as if she had simply clocked in for a day's work. This single act tore the sports world in two. Was it a cheap shot, a dirty play designed to injure and intimidate a young star? Or was it the embodiment of a league's unwritten rule book, a harsh but necessary lesson that every great player must endure? The debate exploded, but one thing was now undeniable. The secret war against Caitlin Clark was now out in the open for the entire world to see. But to understand the collision, you have to understand the enforcer. Sophie Cunningham wasn't a superstar. She wasn't the face of the league or the subject of multi-million-dollar endorsement deals. She was a grinder, a tough-as-nails role player who had carved out a career in the WNBA through sheer grit, determination, and a willingness to do the dirty work that superstars often avoid. Her identity was forged in physicality. Her job was to be a disruptor, to get under the skin of the opponent's best player, and to set a tone of intimidation from the opening tip. In her world, basketball is a contact sport and the paint is a war zone where only the strong survive. From Cunningham's perspective and the perspective of many league veterans, the hit on Clark wasn't personal. It was professional. It was about upholding an unspoken sacred code. This code dictates that rookies, no matter how famous or how talented, must earn their stripe. They must prove they can handle the physicality, the mental warfare, and the relentless pressure of the professional game. The veterans believed the media had crowned Clark before she had proven anything at the pro level, and they saw it as their duty to test the mettle of this new queen. They felt the need to remind her and the world that the WNBA is a league of the toughest female athletes on the planet. This was their way of testing her, of seeing if the phenom had the substance to back up the hype. It was a brutal form of gatekeeping, a trial by fire designed to separate the true legends from the fleeting stars. Much like the infamous Jordan rules employed by the Detroit Pistons to torment a young Michael Jordan, Cunningham was simply the instrument of that collective will, the one who stepped up to deliver the lesson. In her mind, she wasn't being a bully. She was being a veteran, teaching a necessary, painful lesson about survival in the big league. And as the controversy swirled around her, she remained unapologetic, a silent confirmation that this was and always would be part of the game. The moments immediately following the hit were just as telling as the collision itself. As Clark lay on the hardwood, gathering herself, the initial reaction on the court was strangely muted, almost unnervingly calm. There was no major scuffle, no rush from her Indiana Fever teammates to defend their franchise player. The referees conferred briefly, their expressions unreadable, and ultimately called a common foul. To the millions watching at home, it felt like a gross misjudgment, a complete failure to recognize the violent nature of the act. The sheer force of the play seemed to demand a more severe penalty, a flagrant foul, perhaps even an ejection. But on the court, it was treated as just another hard foul in a physical game. This lack of an immediate decisive response from either her teammates or the officials created a vacuum, and speculation rushed in to fill it. Why didn't her teammates retaliate? Were they also part of this old-school mentality, believing Clark needed to fight her own battles, or were they intimidated? Why did the officials seem to downplay the severity of the act? The silence on the court was deafening, and it sent a chilling message to both Clark and the audience. In this league, you're on your own. It was social media that truly ignited the firestorm. Clips of the hit went viral within seconds, looping endlessly on every platform from Twitter to TikTok. Fans were outraged, dissecting the footage like the Zapruder film, accusing Cunningham of a deliberate attempt to injure and the league of failing to protect its biggest star. The incident wasn't just a blip in a game anymore. It was Exhibit A in the case that the WNBA's veterans were actively targeting Caitlin Clark out of pure jealousy. The narrative was set and it was explosive. The league's initial silence allowed this story to take root and grow into a monster, one that questioned the integrity and sportsmanship of its veteran players. The court may have moved on to the next play, but the court of public opinion was just getting started, and its verdict was going to be scathing. It didn't take long for the mainstream media to turn this into a full-blown crisis. Sports debate shows which had previously given the WNBA passing mentions now dedicated entire segments to dissecting the hit. Personalities like Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee weighed in with fiery takes, amplifying the controversy to a massive audience that far exceeded the WNBA's typical reach. The league was suddenly under a microscope and the findings were deeply divisive. On one side, analysts declared it a disgrace to the game. They argued that the WNBA had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with Caitlin Clark and its own players were squandering it with petty, dangerous acts of jealousy. They claimed the league had a responsibility to protect its marquee asset, not just for her safety, but for the future financial health of the entire sport. This camp saw the hit as proof of a toxic culture, one where veterans would rather tear down a rising star than rise with her. On the other side, a chorus of former players and old-school purists pushed back with equal fervor. They called the outrage a product of a soft culture that didn't understand the realities of professional basketball. They defended Cunningham, framing her actions as tough but necessary. Legends like Diana Taurasi had famously warned that reality is coming for Clark. And this, they argued, was that reality. They drew parallels to NBA history, reminding everyone that every great player from Michael Jordan to LeBron James faced intense physicality and welcome to the league moments early in their careers. It was a rite of passage. This camp accused the media and new fans of being naive, of wanting to sanitize a sport that is inherently aggressive. They believed Clark needed to toughen up, not be coddled. This war of words turned the WNBA into the biggest story in sports, dividing fans, players, and pundits down the middle. The hit was no longer just a foul. It was a cultural flashpoint, a referendum on the past, present, and future of the league. Sophie Cunningham's brutal screen was the most visible act, but it was far from an isolated incident. Once analysts and fans started looking closer, they saw a disturbing pattern emerging across all of Clark's games. It seemed every team had an enforcer, a player tasked with giving Clark a physical welcome. In a highly publicized game against the Chicago Sky, Trendy Carter delivered a blindside hip check away from the ball. A move with no basketball purpose whatsoever, sending Clark to the floor. Carter later made comments on social media that seemed to confirm the animosity was personal, adding fuel to the fire and eventually earning a flagrant foul designation after a league review. Against the Dallas Wings, the defense was relentlessly physical with players constantly bumping her, grabbing her jersey off the ball, and testing the limits of what the referees would allow. The Connecticut Sun, known for their bruising style of play, treated her no differently, employing a suffocating physicality that left her visibly frustrated and covered in unseen bruises. It became clear that this wasn't about one player's decision on one night. It was a league-wide strategy, an unspoken agreement among veterans to test Clark's physical and mental breaking point. The message was being sent from every corner of the country. Your college legacy means nothing here. The fame, the endorsements, the charter flights, none of it will protect you between these lines. This revelation shifted the narrative from a single dirty player to a systemic issue within the league's culture. It wasn't Sophie Cunningham versus Caitlin Clark. It was the old guard of the WNBA versus its new messiah. The league was facing a profound identity crisis. Was it a league that would embrace its newfound mainstream appeal? Or would it cling to an old, brutal code of conduct, even if it meant alienating the very fans who were bringing it unprecedented attention? Each hard foul and off-ball shove against Clark was another log on the fire, building a controversy that was now threatening to consume the entire season. The constant barrage of physical hits and media scrutiny began to have a clear and undeniable ripple effect not just on Caitlin Clark, but on the entire WNBA. The league was now in a precarious high-stakes position. It was enjoying the highest ratings and attendance in its history, almost entirely due to the Clark effect. Yet, the on-court product was being defined by a narrative of bullying and jealousy. Officials were caught in an impossible spot. If they called the game too tightly to protect Clark, they were accused of giving her preferential treatment and rigging the game. If they let the teams play physically, they were accused of failing to control the game and allowing their biggest star to be targeted and potentially injured. This intense scrutiny led to inconsistent officiating, which only fueled more frustration from players, coaches, and fans alike. For Clark herself, the toll was becoming visible. The constant physical punishment was wearing her down, and the mental fatigue of being the center of a non-stop controversy was evident in her body language. Her game, while still brilliant in flashes, was becoming more inconsistent as she navigated this new hostile environment. She was facing a level of defensive intensity and targeted aggression that no rookie, male or female, had ever endured under such a bright spotlight. The veteran strategy seemed to be working. They were proving that the WNBA was a different beast. But their victory might come at a tremendous cost. The very thing that made them feel they were protecting the integrity of their league, the physicality, and the earn-your-respect mentality, was being perceived by the massive new audience as unsportsmanlike conduct and pure spite. The league was getting more attention than ever, but it was for all the wrong reasons. The question was no longer about whether Clark could adjust to the WNBA, but whether the WNBA could survive the storm that came with her. The collision between Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark was never just about one play. It was the physical manifestation of a deep-seated conflict within the WNBA. A battle between the gritty, hard-nosed veterans who built the league in the shadows and the dazzling new phenom who brought it into the blinding spotlight. This wasn't a simple case of a hard foul. It was a cultural civil war played out on the hardwood for the world to see. The hit and the countless others like it exposed the raw nerves of a league grappling with unprecedented and uncomfortable change. It revealed a veteran culture that demands respect to be earned through a trial by fire, even if that fire threatens to burn down the very house they built. For Clark, it has been a brutal awakening to the reality that professional sports are as much about psychological warfare as they are about talent. The saga continues to unfold. With every game, every hard foul, and every heated debate, the league finds itself at a crucial crossroads, forced to confront its own identity. Will it protect its biggest star and embrace a new era of commercial success? Or will it allow the old guard's code to dictate its future, risking the alienation of millions of new fans? The final truth is that this conflict may be exactly what the WNBA needed. It's raw, it's compelling, and it has everyone talking. But as the dust settles, the ultimate question remains. Will this intense rivalry forge a stronger, more resilient league? Or will the war to humble Caitlin Clark end up costing them everything?